Well, good evening and happy Shabbat to one and all. I know we have Kirk here. We may have JB later in the program. It is nice to be this fine day in the U.S. Virgin Islands. The U.S. is in freefall. I don't think I've ever experienced a time, in fact, I know I've never experienced a time where people will come up and begin a conversation by saying, the world as we once knew it no longer exists. These are exceedingly trying times. And they'll say it's just frightening what's happening around the world. And the coronavirus got people's attention because they instantly lost their freedom and they lost their ability to earn a living. And the fear porn was devastating. I mean, that's how they controlled people and got them to acquiesce to give up their livelihood and their freedoms. But I think it's the Black Lives Matter approach in the midst of it and seeing how it's riotous, looting, arson, and they have made it such that if you speak out against them, you are ostracized, accused of hate speech instantly. And it's interesting because they are among the most hateful people on the planet. I mean, you just listen to them.
If you just go out and destroy people's property, and that's not your property. You steal their stuff, you can do that, and I don't care what your justification think it is. That's not yours.
No, but beyond that, even if they're not looting, even when the protesters are not looting and when they're not burning things down, when they're not beating people up, even when they're just screaming, their screams are unbelievably hateful. And what we're finding is that Black Lives Matter is really a political organization formed by a communist anti-Semite for the purpose of doing what no one would thoughtfully do, which is to take the world that is not currently communist to communist. And of course, even what we call communist China is only communist now in terms of its politics. It isn't communist in terms of its economy because communism just doesn't work, and yet that's what they want to do. They want to make the nation communist. And one of the interesting things about that whole approach is that what they're trying to do now is eliminate all references to the past. So all the nation's founding fathers have to be condemned. All statues have to be torn down. All songs that are inappropriate, all themes. I mean, it's everybody just bending over backwards and doing Fruit Loops, trying to figure out how they can take some aspect of their past and change it so that they can be seen as progressive. And it was the whole style of communist takeover because communism is so debilitating. You know, it's all this rhetoric about, the 1% shouldn't have all of that money and free enterprise is too much about greed. It's going to be, we're going to distribute prosperity more evenly. What happens is everybody loses their freedom. Coronavirus kinds of draconian response, everybody loses their freedom. And the second thing is everyone becomes poor. And so you even look at China as it's made this attempt to build a competitive economy with these enterprise zones and their free enterprise zones. They're mostly large prison camps. Now, the people come freely, living in dormitories that are as crowded as prisons. Where you'd have hundreds of people to a room. Eating exceedingly simple meals there, rice and maybe just a modicum of meat, and communal bathrooms. And they'll stay there and work 6 days a week, 10, 12 hours a day for most of their lives. And so what these people are trying to do is that the history of communism is so bleak. That's why it was just astonishing to see how many young people voted for Bernie Sanders.
Embraced him.
Yeah, embraced it, because it is devastating as to what it does to people's prosperity and their freedoms. It does the opposite of the rhetoric. And so what they have to do is they have to obscure the past and create a revisionist past so that when people recognize that, oh boy, life's pretty miserable, well, they're told, well, it's so much better than it used to be, and there's no reference to what it used to be other than the revisionist history, because they've destroyed all information about the past. And so it is exactly what they're doing now with this rush to get rid of flags and songs and statues and references to founding fathers. This country, and you and I are not political.
No.
But at least we're informed. And informed, what you'd have to recognize is that America, for most of its existence, has been the freest nation on earth, the most prosperous nation on earth. And yet, what they want to do is to create this impression that America was anything but free and prosperous, and want to condemn the nation. And yeah, the country has problems. Its police are out of control. They've been out of control for over 20 years. Its military is out of control. We spend, in fact, we just had a
trillions.
Just shy of 800 trillion, and it's over 800 billion rather, and it's over $1 trillion when you put in the spy budgets of a military budget that was approved by 90% of U.S. politicians, both Democrats and Republicans. We're way out of control on these things. And our education system has completely failed, so that we're just indoctrinating people so they can't think. So we are in a free fall, and most people recognize it. So this is a time where there is only one answer, and that answer is Yahweh. So that is a positive in all of this. But the combination of these just mindless protests around America and worldwide on behalf of a really bad man that was killed because of his stupid behavior. Now, he didn't deserve to die. He should have been restrained strongly for what he did and for being so drugged out of his mind. And the cop that ended up killing him ought to pay a tremendous price for what he did. But this was not an act of racism. The entire Black Lives Matter movement is based on a lie. There is no institutional racism in America's judicial system. The facts do not bear that out. It bears out exactly the opposite. And the fact is that if a black is killed, 93% of the time is killed by another black. There's a problem in the African-American community. African-American young men are way too violent. They're way too prone to kill one another. They're way too susceptible to being killed and to killing. And there's lots of reasons we can speculate are the cause of that, but we'll never solve that problem when we're obfuscating the problem and pretending, pointing the fingers to all things that have nothing to do with it. And that's where we are. And so this is a scary time in that we've turned very violent, very hateful, very racist, and a lot of people are paralyzed for fear of what's going to happen next. We're losing everything that held our societies together, and then you now have this virus that everything we said about it turned out to be true. What I said originally, in fact, Jim Doyle, the person that started me on these radio programs, he was sending me emails about the coronavirus at the time that it was just being announced in China, and no one, to our knowledge, had it in the United States. He was saying, is this one of the pandemics that
plagues,
plagues that God talks about here in the end times, and I said I don't think so, because the mortality rate is way too low.
That's a reasonable assumption.
And the more I would study it, the more the mortality rate of this appeared to be just slightly higher than the flu. Its infectious rate is much higher than flu. But its mortality rate appeared to be all along about the same as flu. And then it looked like, okay, I could be wrong because, they were making this into the most awful pandemic in the history of the world. And the fear porn was overwhelming. And then politicians shut everything down, destroyed the economy, destroyed the currency, destroyed people's character in terms of their willingness to give up everything and not even hold to their constitutional rights. And so it was devastating what they did. And the whole time I was saying that our response to the coronavirus is going to be far more deadly and far more costly than the lives that are lost to it. Well, the CDC came out, I believe it was yesterday, could have been the day before, with an announcement that was consistent with what I've been saying for a long time, which is that there are at least 10 times more people infected with coronavirus than are showing up testing positive for it. And the reason for that is twofold. One is a very significant number, maybe in the range of 20 or 30, 40% or higher of those that get this virus are asymptomatic. They don't even know they have it. Don't even know they have it. And that's actually the majority of people that get the virus. They don't know they have it. And those that get it, but it's just a cold or a flu, the last thing they want to do is go to a hospital where the people are really sick and dying. So the last thing they want to do is get tested. To the hospital. Yeah, they want to go test for it. So CDC
then you can't work.
That they're doing their antibody tests now, and that they know that there's at least a 10-fold difference between the number of people who have been infected with the virus and the number that we're showing have contracted it through a positive test. Now, if you look at the numbers worldwide, you look at the numbers in the United States. If you look at the numbers in the United States, you would assume, based on the people that have tested positive for it, that it's 5% lethal, which would be concerning because, that would be 50 times or more greater than what you would expect with the flu. But the fact of the matter is that's not the number. When you actually do the antibody tests, and we know that the number that have contracted the disease is at least 10 times the reported number. Now your mortality rate
is way down.
Same as the flu. And we don't shut down the world. But the shutting down the world had very little to do with coronavirus and having a lot to do with how liberal, in terms of government influence, politicians have become, not in America, but around the world. So we are poised for the kind of a one world government for total control over people's lives. And we're moving there very quickly. It's hard to imagine how something like this could have had this big an effect. And then you combine it with the stupidity of Black Lives Matter. And we're in a death spiral around the world, and people know it. The number of long conversations we've had, particularly with blacks, they're really worried. I mean, working blacks are. This is devastating.
Yes, I've had that conversation this past week. They don't want to get out there and do this, and there's something wrong with all this to them. So there's something wrong to anybody that thinks about it. Anarchy is not good. That's not the solution for anything. But can I say something a little bit on a personal note, though?
Yeah, sure.
In the industry that I've grown up in, I worked most of my life, and either in art supplies or the manufacture of, where I was demonstrator or salesman or whatever, and also teaching and selling paintings in galleries and things. That I know that's a small industry and it's not very important to most people in the grand scheme of things. But I was talking to somebody that you realize that all those art stores and all those people and all those jobs, which are still in the thousands and thousands, there's nowhere for them to go. They have shut down every industry. It's not just about restaurants. My God, all these salespeople, the manufacturers are huge. At least it's in the billions in the manufacturing industry. And I mean, if you can't gather to meet in an art class, everything dives in the art supply business. And God, it's devastating. I have nowhere to go either. They shut me down. I got 2 letters rather, one from the city and one shutting down, one from I moved my operation to City Hall over by the city gallery. And I could still teach over there without having any overhead, So I shut down. First of all, I got one that said you have to shut down. I'd already shut down because of Terry's situation, our situation. But I could not open there again because that would be in violation of everything because we can't gather together. And then over at the city gallery that also teaches classes, I could have worked there if I needed the money, which but now they said that was all shut down and you cannot gather there. You can't do nothing.
The governor of California announced yesterday that there was a economic catastrophe. The revenues were down 30% in the state, and expenses were up almost 30% in the state.
Yeah,
and that combination is going to put the state in a $50 billion deficit this year. And of course, states can't do what the federal government does, which is to create the illusion of money.
Yeah.
Well, so we are in. We have a bunch of idiot politicians who are power hungry, who are trying to control people's lives and love the control that job gives them, and they know nothing of business, and they've destroyed it. They know nothing of value of money, and they've destroyed it. And they've destroyed people's characters. It is why when we talked a week ago and 2 weeks ago about the problem of entitlements of welfare and reverse income tax credits and food stamps and the like, is if you give somebody something for nothing for too long, you will destroy their character. And now what we're doing is we're telling people they cannot work, and they're being given monies by the government, becoming more dependent. We are destroying people's character, what was left of them. So this is it's a very scary time. We have the only answer. If there ever was a time that we need to do the best we can to communicate, it is now. Now, speaking of that, I shared with you briefly before this program that starting next week, it looks like we will be syndicated on CRN. I will do my best to get the information out as to how we will do that. But Jerry McLaughlin, my good friend, the man who was the publicist for what we are doing for many, many years, still serves as a publicist, does so freely, as love of Yah. He was doing so much work. It was a benefit to CRN that he was able to get them to provide 2 hours once a week without commercial interruption for us to broadcast this show and to have it syndicated. So that's what we'll be doing next week. I don't know how that will integrate with the Blog Talk Radio. I'll do my best to communicate with everyone as to how we will integrate with Blog Talk Radio, if we are at all, or if we'll be on the CRN platform, and then how everyone can listen. So we'll do our best to communicate that. I did see one other matter here. Steve, who is in the chat room under Bloodbath, that one of his YouTube programs was pulled off because, of course, Facebook and YouTube and Amazon and virtually everyone else is in a censorship frenzy. And it was an interview that I did with al-Rassooli back during the Shattering Myths days on how the 8th surah of the Quran, particularly when you combine it with the Hadith, proves emphatically that Islam was conceived as a crime syndicate. That was the first official act of the Islamic era. It was called the Battle of Badr. There was no battle. It was Muhammad as a thief going out with a group of a gang, really, an armed gang, against the camel merchants of Mecca and robbing them. And he admits that he went out for no other reason than to rob them. It was armed robbery. And then he killed many of them. He enslaved some of them. He abused them. He tortured them, and then he desecrated their bodies. It's an exceedingly disgusting story that would make a mobster cringe. And so it's clear that Islam began as a crime syndicate, and virtually all of Muhammad's 70-some-odd terrorist raids during the first 10 years of the Islamic era were based on a singular thing, which was there was no economy amongst the Muslims. They did not work. And so they funded the growth of Islam by being robber barons. Yes, they stole their way to prosperity, and it was all armed attacks against defenseless civilians. Now, that's
so
the
how
truth.
How do you justify shutting something down when it's right there in print?
Well, that's the
That's a rhetorical question to us.
The thing about political correctness and their designation of hate. They will allow the most hateful religion in the history of humankind to promote itself, but when somebody tells the truth about it, and the evidence is overwhelming that what I've just said is true, and al-Rassooli and I would have said it's the same way. Truth is not a defense in the political correct world. It's just like with Black Lives Matter. The truth is that is a racist slogan, and that they are a hateful group, and that the problem is in the black community where blacks are killing other blacks. The problem is not in this notion of institutionalized racism is a complete myth. So truth no longer matters. That's one of the scariest things about why we're in a place where we cannot resolve these problems. Back in the Shattering Myths days, when I was doing that program, and even before then on Yada Yahweh Radio, you go back almost 20 years when I began this, people would ask, well, what do you recommend? You talk about these things all being wrong. What do you recommend? I said, well, I can tell you what you would need to do to resolve this problem. What I cannot tell you is as a way to get that done, because even if you were a benevolent dictator and didn't have a Congress and didn't have to face re-election and could just do the right thing for the people and resolve all of these host of problems, it's not doable. People are not interested. We have dumbed down and indoctrinated 2 generations of people such that they do not think anymore. Just why Black Lives Matter has become so enormously popular, even though they're a racist and hateful group whose premise is entirely wrong. So we can't fix these problems because the capacity of most people to think has been so degraded that evidence and reason are not a defense for anything, including pulling a Facebook presentation that explained why Islam is responsible for 90+% of the world's terrorist events. Let's return to Mizmor, Psalm 22. We were at statement 21 when we concluded our program. We were cut off rather abruptly. It was a glitch with Blog Talk Radio because we were all cut off simultaneously. It says, "You have chosen to liberate me and deliver my unique life from this loneliness, the fearsome and destructive beast's mouth." And from, I'm going to give you two different possible renderings of the second statement. The horns of the bull representing the flashing light that has risen on high. You have answered me during my affliction. Let me give you a second rendering of that last statement because it is Karin Ra'am. And then from the brilliant light of this summit, which lifts on high, you have answered me during my affliction. So those are the two ways that you can look at the end statement. But some of the things that are important to convey here. One of them is that yasha, which is the verb that comes first and the most prolific of the prophets, Yashayah. And it comes second in the compound name of the Pesach El, the Passover lamb, which is Yahosha. Yasha, I had translated very simply as saved for most of the past 20 years. About a year or so ago, even though the amplified translations, within the parenthetical, I would always have deliver, liberate, and freedom, and save from harm's way. It didn't dawn on me. I guess I'm slow. Until fairly recently, maybe the last 2 years, that there's a reason that the primary meaning of Yasha isn't save, but is instead to deliver, to liberate, and to free. Because the covenant isn't about salvation. What Yahweh is doing is liberating us from the harmful effects of human institutions like religion and politics and militarism and conspiracy. So he is liberating us from these things. He is helping to deliver us from these things. It's the story, of course, is told in the Exodus. The most political, religious, militaristic, and really controlling economic superpower of the time was Egypt. Yahweh liberated his people from Egypt. He wasn't there to save his people from Egypt, but to liberate them, to deliver them. And so you have a child. Our goal as a parent is to liberate them, to free them. Our goal as a parent is not to save them, but we want to deliver them. We want to liberate them. We want to keep them out of harm's way. And that is the primary meaning of this word, Yasha. It is a very powerful word. It's one of the most important verbs in the Torah, prophets, and Psalms. And we need to see it in conjunction with the covenant. What is the first condition of the covenant?
To walk away.
To walk away from one's country. And the specific country was Babylon, confusion by way of intermixing. To walk away from the family of man and to walk away from human culture, societies. And Babel, of course, is the mother of all of the beasts, the mother of all harlots. And therefore, when you speak about walking away from Babel, you're speaking of walking away from religion and politics. So this idea of us distancing ourselves from those things, and God working to deliver and liberate us from the stench and stain and pestilence of those things go hand in glove. So it's an exceedingly important aspect of our perspective in understanding our relationship with Yah. And then it says, you have chosen to liberate me and deliver my unique life from this separation, from this loneliness, my special upbringing and inclusive rearing that has caused this singular union out of the fearsome and destructive bound. Yashid is a concept that is difficult to understand. I'm going to do my best. We're going to get to a section here where I'm going to tread into waters that maybe I ought not tread because, quite frankly, I'm not smart enough. And I'm going to share what I think is going on here in terms of the soul of Yahusha and his nature, the nature of the Pesach El, the nature of the man, the boy, child, man, who served as the Pesach El, vis-a-vis the soul that was now suffering matzah, so that we could all receive the benefits of the covenant. But I do think that Yahusha, well, he was not the Son of God. That's Dode. Well, he was not the Messiah, therefore the Christ. That's Dode. He is unique. And the uniqueness is necessary because Yahweh made a promise to Abraham, and Yahweh honors his promises. And the promise he made to Abraham is that he would provide the lamb. And since Yahusha is the Passover lamb, in fact, he is the only candidate for the Passover lamb. One of the things I ended my rewrite of the prologue of Yada Yahweh this afternoon, and I'm writing to Jews, and I said, if Yahusha isn't the Pesach El, the Passover lamb, there is none. There is no hope for one. Yeah, that role can't even be fulfilled today. And so you really blew it when you rejected this notion, the Christian promotion of him being the Messiah. Yeah, he wasn't the Messiah. You were right. He wasn't the Messiah. But he was for darn well sure of the Pesach El, and it should have been obvious. And if you don't recognize him as such, and Yahweh fulfilling the promise of Pesach as such, then what in the world is the story of the first Pesach in Egypt? What is its purpose?
It wouldn't be one otherwise.
There isn't one. There isn't one. Yahweh could have picked a lot of other ways to get the Egyptians to say, okay, you can leave now. So there really is no purpose of it unless Yahweh did what he promised to Abraham and Yishak and provided the Pesach lamb to fulfill his promise. And so the uniqueness has to be that the Pesach El has to, some part of the Pesach El has to represent Yahweh. Yakid is conveying that. I think that Yahusha was born with Yahweh's soul. Now, when I say that, it puts me in really uncomfortable position because it's so easy to be misunderstood. Because then you would say, well, that makes him God. If he has God's soul, he must be God. No. I have God's spirit. I'm not God. God's spirit, it's really clear. Sometimes I may not come across this way, but the Spirit of Yahweh came upon me. It's clear as day. And yet I'm not God. Yahweh has a soul. You and I have a soul. Mm-hmm. Our soul is the essence of who we are. If I were to take your soul from you, Kirk, you would cease to exist.
Of course.
Okay. There's nothing left.
Understood,
The body is just matter, and it's dead matter. The body has no value whatsoever the moment your soul is removed. And your soul can be extinguished, it can be incarcerated, or it can be enriched and empowered into the seventh dimension. When your soul goes to the seventh dimension, your soul is the totality of who you are. That the rest of you, that body, is absolutely meaningless to you. The soul is everything. Everything.
And
that's all that. Right. The totality of your intellect, your attributes, your attitude, your memory, your personality, everything is wrapped up in your soul. The opposite is true with Yahowah. So we're talking about the same thing, that to animate life, for a living being to be observant and responsive to their environment. All living beings, all animals, have a soul. And so Yahowah has to have a soul if he is going to represent an aspect of his nature in human form. From Yahweh's perspective, the soul is the opposite that it is for us. And that Yahowah can loan out his soul, and Yahweh's not diminished one iota. Still has all of his attributes, all of his personality, all of his ability,
all of his power,
all of his intellect, all of his power. Everything is intact when he loans out his soul. Just as Yahowah can loan out his spirit and be undiminished by it. In fact, he can loan out his spirit and be enriched by it.
That's
and so,
understandable concept too. Yes.
Yeah. So, if you look at a soul as the repository of someone's character, their attitude, their personality, their attributes, their intellect, many of their memories, that sort of thing, then imagine that as being on a probe that Yahweh would install in a person. And so it gave Yosha, who was born as an ordinary man. In fact, Yeshaya 53 is just an absolute killer to Christianity. He says there is nothing about him that would cause anybody to pay him any attention. What in the hell are you doing worshiping him and pretending that he's God? Mm-hmm. No, there was nothing about him. But he had Yahweh's soul, which means Yahweh could honor the promise that he made to provide the Pesach Ale, the Passover lamb, and fulfill that process. So I think that is what's being said here. My unique life from this loneliness, the fearsome and destructive beats mouth. Arya is a powerful line. But in this particular case, I've translated it in a way that is consistent with the word, is a fearsome and destructive beast mouth. And the reason I've done that is that Yahweh is really clear about the nature of Sheol and who goes there. And the thing that he's asking us to leave, to separate ourselves from, is the very thing that you would go to if you're separated from Yahweh. So you go to Yahweh, you're separated from Yahweh.
Well, hello, guys. Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
it sounds like
just came on live.
Yeah, so I'm calling in on a cell phone. Well, if there's ever a time that I'm ready to leave Blog Talk Radio, it is so frustrating. You know, we're using the Direct Connect. We have all the equipment to do it. Spent all the money to get the kind of connectivity to enable it, and the headsets and the right computer. and everything to make it as stable as possible. And this is not an inexpensive service, and it just continues to be one enormous frustration after another. I'm certainly frustrated with them. So anyway, we will be on CRN. I believe it's CRN next week, and I will have to get everyone communication as to how we're going to be able to do that. So what we were talking about here is that Karen was an exceedingly important term because that's the clue. It's the clue that says that this individual is being provided by Yahweh. And so Yahweh gave him this probe called, in this case, a soul, because it is what animates a living being. And so it's actually Yahweh's soul that fulfilled matzah. Pesach, Matzah, and Bakurim is a family, and also Shavuot is a family affair. You've got Yosha fulfilling Pesach as the Passover lamb. You've got Yahweh's soul actually fulfilling matzah. Now, again, you have to understand the difference between the soul vis-a-vis Yahweh and a soul vis-a-vis Craig, Kirk, and JB is a very different thing.
Different animal,
Yes, so it's the totality of us. It's just an aspect of Yahweh. And so Yahweh sent this probe, which was his soul, into matzah for our benefit. And, of course, it's the set-apart spirit that released that soul from the black hole. Now, I got a letter about a week ago saying, how is that even possible? That if Sheol is inescapable and is a black hole where nothing escapes throughout all of time, how does the set-apart spirit accomplish that?
But that's not necessarily so. I mean, scientists say that. They say there could be a way.
Yeah. Well, first of all, black holes. Some things do escape. There's radiation that comes out of a black hole, but there's a better, much clearer answer, and it falls into dimensions. Yahweh is a 7-dimensional being. The space-time is 4 dimensions. I think that there are 6 dimensions that work in the universe. We understand 4 of them, but I think there are 6, which explains what we call dark energy and dark matter. Now, I want to take it down a notch. If Walt Disney drawing Mickey Mouse, and Walt Disney puts Mickey Mouse inside of a square in Flatland, from Mickey's perspective, there is no way out. Mickey does not know up. Up is beyond Mickey's grasp. His whole world is Flatland, that sheet of paper that he was drawn on. And so if you put a square around him or a circle around him, he can travel on the inside of the circle forever. He can't even fathom that there's a way out. But a 3-dimensional being can say, all I got to do is lift in the image of old Mick out and Mick's free. So imagine the universe that is 6 dimensions. And with the 6-dimensional universe, all you have to do is, and you're a 7-dimensional being, there is an escape route within Sheol for a 7-dimensional being. I am seeing a sign here on Blog Talk Radio that says that that I'm not connected. Please call in. Are we still live, or have we cut off again?
I don't know.
Oh, I can hear you, Kirk.
Yeah.
So, can anybody else hear us? Are we still podcasting?
Well, I'm certainly enjoying this. So.
Okay, I'm hearing an okay. So we're gonna continue here with an okay. All right. That being the case, we'll continue. So
Okay.
I think that is the mechanism that's at play here, and I think we're being communicated very insightfully by Yahweh. Now, first, let's just take a moment too and talk about this beast, because this REA, I translated it as a vicious beast. It's used in the 7th Mizmor. And here's how it's used in the 7th Mizmor. It says, Yahweh, my God, in you I find a trusted and safe place. With you, delivering me from all of my pretentious pursuers, especially the boisterous who are verbally contentious against me. You are preserving me for a later time. Or otherwise, in the manner of a fiercely destructive being, a vicious beast in search of prey, he, to satiate his own craving, will rip me apart, my soul snatching it away and shredding it without sparing it. And so this vicious and destructive beast is Arya. And it cannot be a lion there.
I can add to that too. I can almost prove it. But go ahead.
Lions and souls are not material, so it can't be the lion. It has to be the vicious beast. And Yahweh uses the term beast to talk about what grew out of Babylon. You know, Babylon, Media, Persia, Greece, Rome, and then Roman Catholicism are the great beasts that harmed the world in so many different ways. So, what were you going to add to it, Kurt?
Well, I was going to say that when I was studying last night, I just said, well, this can't be a lion for the simple reason that it's an authority. I was looking at the letters, and it's an authority. The base letters, the three-letter root, is an Aleph, Rosh, and a Hey, which means an authority that gathers. On the positive side, it can be an authority that gathers the observant or the best to himself and those who are reaching up to him. You could also look at it from a negative standpoint as a collection or to be gathered together. If it's not a lion, it could easily have been something like Paul of Christianity, because that is also is a metaphor for plucking, like plucking grapes off a vine. And I got the plucking from ara, which is the verbal root of the word, which is to pluck and to gather. And in Psalms 80:12, that's when it's used to pick fruit. So the fruit of the vine is always one of the metaphors for Yahweh's family. Then another thing I thought about, I said, well, wait a minute. Why would he choose a lion? Because lions are so identified with Yehuda, and which means related to Yah, and that would be a very awkward metaphor for something like this. But it fits very well as far as something that's plucking people away from him. And I think there's enough information there to say, well, wait a minute, that's much stronger than using a lion. I don't even know why to use it as a lion. But it can be a beast, but it is the beast of Rome, the beast of Christianity. Sure. So it just didn't make sense as a lion.
Correct.
Plus,
so I think that's
talking about something in a different dimension now that in Sheol, which is that would be ridiculous as well. So
the JPS Tanakh, Jewish Publication Society, rendered that last statement, "From the horns of the wild oxen rescues me."
Mm-hmm.
Now, we're talking about the fulfillment of matzah here. I just don't think there's any wild oxen there. The New American Standard Bible, which claims to be literal, that writes this whole preamble on Yahweh's name is meaningless, says that from the horns of the wild oxen you answered me. So, do you think that Yahweh is
which is a metaphor for Satan? No.
Yeah, is giving the right that he's playing rodeo here, and that he's between the horns of a wild oxen. I tell you, I do not think so. So that's not right. The NIV says, "Save me from the horns of the wild oxen." here you have the passage that Yosha cited as the Pesach El that is providing us with an insight as to how this was fulfilled and how Yahweh went about making this all benefit us. And you can't get out of the way of oxens. It's sad. Well, I guess the worst is the King James Bible. The Christians will hold that up and say this is the Word of God.
Word of God. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the King James Bible has unbelievably, for thou hast heard me from the horns of the unicorns. Oh, by the way, horns is plural, and unicorns only have one of them, but I guess that's not the biggest.
Who wants to quibble?
That's probably not the biggest problem with that. So, who knows?
Well, you've got
All
Raim,
right.
is also there. You've got Raim, which is also the I think it's the verbal root, isn't it? That would be, that's the verbal root, which would mean to rise or be lifted up, which has nothing to do with the wild oxen. So why not go with that?
Yeah, it's Strong's Concordance, which is based on the King James, says Ra'am is from Ra'am and translates as unicorn 9 times, and is probably the great aurochs or wild bulls, which are now extinct. Yeah. The exact meaning is not known. Strong's also goes on to report that Ra'am means lifted up and to rise. But they don't bother explain what rising has to do with wild bulls or unicorns, for that matter. And that's probably because those who align themselves with the spirit represented by the bull go in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
Here's another example. The King James Version renders Bamidbar, Numbers 23:22 as, God brought them out of Egypt. He hath, as it were, the strength of a unicorn. Okay. These guys are just absolute jokers.
Yeah. No question.
The New American Standard Bible has God brings them out of Egypt. He is for them like the horns of a wild ox.
Well, yeah, that's why it was so. That's why they built the golden calf, right? Because that was symbolic. Yeah, come on. Hardly. Oh, wild ox.
Very frustrating. So then the next statement reads, I have chosen to continually relate and record your name to my brethren within the midst of the community so as to radiate your brilliant source of enlightenment. Now, I ended up having to rewrite almost everything we talked about last week because the insights revealed that the person really being talked about was Dode himself, and so I had to change the whole perspective of what we were looking at. Well, here again, is there any indication at all that Yosha continued and continuously related and recorded Yahweh's name?
Where would you find it? No, it's just told.
If it happened, where would
certainly
you
buried it somewhere?
Yeah.
No, you can't.
So it would be if it's being applied to Yosha, it is it's either inaccurate or serves no purpose because it could not be verified. And all the evidence that we have suggests otherwise, that it did not happen. So, who are we talking about here under that basis? We have to be talking, about Dode. He's the one who continually related.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
Continue to send now.
So, I have chosen to continually relate and record your name to my brethren. Now, my brethren, again, makes sense if you put it on Dode's lips. So Dode could be saying here, Yesaniah, what you've done here is so magnificent, I want to continue relate and record your name. And I want to do it to my brethren, which would be to Yisrael, within the midst of the community, because that's where Dode is and will be, so as to radiate your brilliant source of enlightenment, halal, which is to become a radiant and ongoing visible source, clearly extolling your merit. This is really, it's an interesting insight as to what's transpiring here and what how Yosha and Dode and Yahweh are working together to share this story. 22:23 reads, "You who respect and revere Yahweh radiate his light." Do you know what when Yahweh is placed as it would normally be in Hebrew after radiate his light, which is halalhu, it's hallelujah. This is hallelujah.
Oh, hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
Yes. To radiate light, of course. Yeah.
Yes. So it is. This is really a place where it reads hallelujah. In this particular place, it reads hallelujah, but nonetheless, it is hallelujah. Halal means brilliant source of illumination. And so when we're talking about his name, what is the name that's being recorded here? It's not Yosha's name, isn't it? You know, I'm going to record and continually speak your name. I'm going to respect and revere. It doesn't say respecting and revere
Yosha.
No, it's Yahweh. And that's Dode's position too. You know, Dode was an eyewitness to what Yosha did. If anybody ought to have had this sense of respect and reverence going all the way to perhaps being kind of overly awed by Yosha, it would be Dode. He was the one eyewitness to all of this. And yet, what he says is, I respect and revere you. Ought to be a message.
That's pretty significant. Wow.
Yeah. There's a reason that Dode is considered right. He had this right.
Oh.
The next statement, 22:23 reads, "All descendants of Jacob choose to consider him worthy of respect and massively